Welcome, teacher friend. I'm Lori.
And I'm Melissa.
We are two literacy educators in Baltimore. We want the best for all kids, and we know you do too.
Our district recently adopted a new literacy curriculum, which meant a lot of change for everyone. Lori and I can't wait to keep learning about literacy with you today.
Hi, everyone. We are so happy that you are with us today. We have some incredible guests. Melissa and I are really thrilled and honored to have Kyair and Katie with us from Baltimore City Public Schools. And we'd love for them to just share a little bit about themselves, what they teach, where they're teaching, and anything else interesting that they would like to share with us as we dive into their stories about how they launched Wit and Wisdom this past school year. So year one implementation in Baltimore City for this podcast. So Kyair, would you mind jumping in?
Yeah, sure thing. Hey, everybody. Super excited to be here. So thank you very much, Melissa and Lori. I think that this is a real, pleasure and a real treat. So I thank you both and everyone else listening. Again, my name is Kyair. Kids call me Mr. K, and I teach at Waverly Elementary here in Baltimore City. I teach sixth grade literacy and language arts. This is our first year of implementation with Wit and Wisdom, so that is over, and it's pretty kind of cool to look at the data and the results of what the kids have been able to do this year. So I've been posting a lot on Twitter and other social media, just sort of bragging about how awesome my kids are and how great their student work is. And it's been a really fruitful year. I would say that I'm excited about where the district is going and where Waverly is going. And I'm really excited to improve. I actually just finished my 6th year of teaching here in Baltimore City, and I feel like we are getting better, and so am I. So thanks for having me.
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We know you have a really busy day ahead, even though it's summer. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Katie, tell us about you.
Hi, I'm Katie Scotty. I teach 4th grade ELA and social studies at Thomas Johnson Elementary Middle. And this is I'm going into my 14th year of teaching in Baltimore City, which is really hard to believe. Like Kyair, this is, last year was year 1 of implementing Wit and Wisdom. And I'm looking forward to year 2, just because year 1 felt a little and we'll talk about it more, but it was definitely a challenge. It was a growth year for me, and I'm excited to take off and running with year 2. Again, I've been teaching for 14 years. I did some early childhood. I've done a lot of work in special education, and I was also an instructional coach for a few years. I'm happy to be back in the classroom and to be implementing this curriculum. And thank you so much for having us talk about this, because I think it's really important to spread what works, what doesn't work, and some of our success stories with other people in the district and beyond. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. We're so excited to have both of you. So my first question for you all is, you're both experienced teachers, and at the beginning of last year, right around this time, you just learned that you're going to be starting this new curriculum. So I'm just wondering, what your initial reactions were when you heard about Wit and Wisdom, when you first looked at it, maybe the first professional development, just what all around, before you even taught it, what were you guys thinking?
So I can start with me just being, the first thing I thought was I was really excited to have texts, and I saw the texts Wit and Wisdom came to a CLN meeting and brought texts with them. And I was excited to have authentic texts and I was excited that reading and writing were integrated. Mm-hmm. But when I looked through the manual, I was like, man, this is really deep. There's a lot in each lesson. And I was pretty unsure about how it was going to be differentiated. I thought it looked like a pretty good curriculum for my GAL students, but was unsure of how it would work for my lower students. I didn't think I would be able to differentiate well enough for them, and that I was going to have to customize lessons or make up my own lessons for my low students. And I also was concerned about guided reading. I was pretty adamant that I still needed to make time for guided reading every day, and I didn't know where I was going to be able to fit those in the lessons. So those were my initial thoughts.
All right, Katie, I have so many questions based on what you just said. And I want to thank you, because I think that I mean, I feel like every single thing that you said is something that is just racing through teachers' minds who are in K-5 and just have that concern about guided reading, who have that concern about what about my students who are not reading on grade level? How am I going to change this or customize it? We hear it all. I hear it all day. I'm sure Melissa hears it too. Can you tell us about a little bit more about how, when you said make up or customize lessons, how did you end up doing that? And just tell us a little bit more about that.
I did not end up doing that. In terms of the meat of the Wit and Wisdom lessons, I would have to just do more of figuring out what scaffolds to put in place. In terms of pacing and what is available in the lessons, you really don't need to make up anything on your own. And when I'm talking to teachers about this when we do our fellowship, that really to me is the beauty of the program, that it's integrated instruction and everything is really there for you. The planning then, and what I had to understand was that the planning is more about how I'm going to scaffold each lesson to meet the need of every learner.
Yeah.
So differentiation is in place, and I did not have to make up anything on my own. I will say the only thing that I had to do a little bit differently, since I teach fourth grade, so for my students who were still not decoding and still had some phonics skills, I did, in the small group time, I did supplement Words Their Way, just in small group time to help them with their word reading and phonics.
And that's outside of the 90-minute Wit and Wisdom
That block. Is outside of the 90-minute Wit and Wisdom block. And in the 90-minute Wit and Wisdom block, those students who were below grade level in reading did not have different texts. They all had access to the same text that all my students did. And I think that was very important in this, in making them feel like they had access to the same knowledge that all the other students in my class did. They just needed different supports in order to gain that access to the text.
Great. Thank you for elaborating. And I want to continue to talk about that scaffold piece, but I have a feeling that Kyair is going to say some things about that as well. So I'm hoping that maybe he can share his story and then we can blend that together as a conversation after we hear from him. Is that okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Cool. Kyair, you're on.
Yeah. My initial reaction was honestly one of skepticism, right? I've been pretty open in talking about my initial hesitancy rather about Wit and Wisdom. Again, if we're going to engage in some vulnerable conversation and some honest sort of real talk, if you will, I was really concerned about what Wit and Wisdom meant for my Black students. So I teach at Waverly. We're a Title I school. A majority of the kids that I teach are Black students. And I recall going to the Wit and Wisdom website and, looking at some videos, sort of reading the blogs. And I just don't recall an urban district like Baltimore being talked about. I don't remember seeing a lot of videos with majority Black classrooms. I don't recall, research where a majority of the students were performing below grade level and in some cases well below grade level. So my initial skepticism was, while the city schools curriculum wasn't, all that good, for some reason, it was a little more palatable, if you will, or digestible in terms of scaffolds, ways to customize and make it more appropriate. So there was some, honestly, resistance. I did engage in some really good professional development. Her name is Rachel Rooney, and she actually ended up curating the text sets and the book list for Wit and Wisdom, and she's got a pretty senior position with Great Minds. So what I realized now is really great professional development with a facilitator who cares deeply for the participants in the room and believes in the program can do a lot to help change your mindset. And I realized that while I was well within my right to have those thoughts because they're mine and, what I have to say matters because I matter, that it was I needed to give the program a chance. So I had to check myself, and I had a moment of sort of a come to Jesus moment that some of us have in our lives, usually not with curriculum, but that's what I had mine with. And my come to Jesus moment was really this, and it was twofold, right? It was, Kyair, either you don't believe in your students or you don't believe in yourself. And the reason I say that is because, you know, the more that I studied Wit and Wisdom, the more that I realized it was about building equity. And I'm thinking, Kyair, that's how you sort of built your entire teaching career, is you teach for equity, leveling the playing field, giving Black kids an opportunity. So if you're saying that they can't do this rigorous curriculum or this program, what are you saying about your kids that, you know, you say are very important to you, which they are? Or there's this sort of second hand where it's like, am I just unwilling or am I unable? And I refuse to believe that I'm unwilling, because I like learning, I like digging deep, and I want to get better always. Like I've not peaked, I've not reached my best yet. I still want to get better. And then there's so then are you just unable? And that's where professional development comes in, where it takes a really good facilitator as well as a shift in mindset, right? Like Wit and Wisdom to me is not a have to, it is a get to. We get to implement an equity-based curriculum. I know people talk about how it's a knowledge building curriculum and it's, you know, content, culturally, all of that is true. But as you know, Dr. Santeliza says, how come we can't do both? And it is knowledge building, it is content rich, culturally relevant, you know, text. It is that. And it's also an equity building curriculum because it goes so deep with knowledge building and leveling the playing field. So I learned all of that after I had to check myself, change my mindset and engage in some professional development with a facilitator who was absolutely amazing. And that really started to chip away at that initial hesitancy. And then the last thing I'll say is when you start seeing what your kids can do, as opposed to sort of, you know, wallowing, if you will, sort of in the shallows of what they can't do or what their perceived deficits are, you will be wildly amazed, and I would even say humbled, that you even were initially resistant because they took the curriculum and my kids did so well with it, and the products of their labor are kind of amazing and breathtaking, honestly, if I can brag on them a little bit.
You certainly can.
Absolutely. Yeah. And can I just say too, I mean, sometimes Lori and I both stalk you on Twitter. We see everything you guys post all the time. So many great things that you are doing with your kids and that your kids are doing. So I'm just really thankful that you guys are able to be honest about the initial reactions, because I think sometimes when people see teachers who have all this success, it's like, well, you know, they were on board from the beginning. They kind of brush it off a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
If they might not know that you have these same first reactions.
Yeah.
So it's really nice to hear that, you know, you had those same hesitancies and skepticisms at the beginning, just so people know that it's real. It is real. I'm wondering if either of you have any stories or can remember maybe that the first moment when you saw your students kind of doing, when you said like doing something that you maybe thought that they couldn't do or wouldn't be able to do. Do you have any recollections of that over the course of this first year?
Yeah, I've got one that actually was pretty quick. It was out of module 0. So a couple of things happened, right?
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat. But what I found really interesting was like I became far, I don't know, more learned, if you will, and cultured thanks to Wit and Wisdom, because first of all, the program or the curriculum uses art as a visual text. So it's another means of exposing students to rich, relevant text. In Module 0, there is a piece of artwork. I believe it's the Sleeping Gypsy for grades 6 to 8. And I kind of thought to myself, I mean, how exactly is a piece of art going to help build knowledge, you know, for kids who aren't really exposed to art? You know, I mean, it's sort of like all of these cliches about those kids this, these kids that, and then art, right? And I'm having to check myself, and I'm kind of like a little trepidatious. But here we go, and we start analyzing this art, and I'm like, wait a second, I can teach so many skills through looking at this piece of art. First of all, when Katie's talking about how do I scaffold for my lowest students, like just being blunt, if your eyes work and your brain is interested in the art, then you have access to it. So first of all, it is a gypsy who's sleeping with a lion that's like coming up to her, and my kids were just instantly captivated. A really amazing color palette. And I give all of this background to sort of, no pun intended, paint a picture of how I know I'm an ELA teacher, so I got a lot more. But just, yeah, I mean, it was a stroke of genius, if you will. And I don't want you to brush that aside. And I will stop there at 3 because that's too many. But the kids were really excited about deepening their understanding of art and color and whether or not it was night or day based on a literal understanding of what was going on. So that's the organized stage, what's happening. And I didn't think that I could spend as much time on a piece of art asking a very simple question: what is happening in this visual text? And we spent so much time on it. And then I'm able to go back and we set up a class debate. You know, are you team morning or are you team nighttime? And we had kids go up to the board and pointing and using text evidence, right, by pointing at, oh, well, I can see the shadow. And when you start realizing that they were inadvertently using art terms, you're just like, you know what? I'm going to go sit down somewhere because they are totally rocking and killing this. And I did not think that we could. So let me put myself in timeout and I'll see you guys in 5 minutes.
Yeah. You know what? That reminds me of something, Katie. I think that Liz Manolis quoted you. And I don't know that you know that she quoted you.
I do not.
In like a meeting, and she said, like, Katie Scotty said, you just have to put it in front of them and get out of their way. And I don't know if you remember saying that, but that's exactly what Kyair is talking about, right? Like getting out of their way, letting them do the hard work and struggle through it. And they're coming out on the other side with these incredible, you know, analyzations and interpretations and things that we wouldn't have expected. So Katie, would you mind sharing anything that you want to add on to what Kyair said? And Kyair, thank you. I love that. That was like an incredible story from module 0. Which is like the
first week.
That's the first week.
Yes,
first week.
So first of all, I love that Liz said that. That's awesome. And that was actually probably one of the hardest things I had to learn how to do, is how to move away from them and let them do the work. But just to connect to Kyair real quick, I did a launch last week and I told the participants that when I first knew that there was artwork in this curriculum, I was like, okay, I don't have time for that. I'll give that to the art teacher. I'll let the art teacher look at the artwork with the kids and she can do that. But similar to Kyair, I just want to point out that when the kids do this artwork, it's like they're the most silent they ever are. When they're staring at that screen and analyzing artwork, they're so into it. And that was one of my first things as well, just like the engagement in the art. But the second thing for me was 4th grade module 1 is a great heart, and they discuss the difference between a figurative great heart and a literal great heart. And they start with a text called A Circulatory Story, which is all about how the human heart works. And it is a dense text. It is deep. There's a ton of really difficult academic vocabulary words in that text. And when I looked at that text, it was like, okay, how am I going to break this down for them? But what happened was we were discussing the literal great heart, and they were having a discussion about how the heart worked. And then we moved on to the figurative great heart and talking about love and compassion and what it means to have that heart and what are the characteristics of a person with a great heart. And it was like the end of the day one day, and one of my kids said, God, this day was so long. It's probably the worst day of school ever. And another kid looked at him and said, that's definitely figurative language. And it's not the worst day of your life. Come on, that's a hyperbole. And like, and then they kind of went back and forth with like talking about what the difference between literal and figurative language was. And the connections that they were making to the text in that conversation, I was like, wow, my kids know this stuff. And they're talking about it outside of an academic conversation. And then from then on, I will just say what sold me on the curriculum and what I think made my kids buy in, and I'll talk about this over and over again, is the level of engagement in text. And so when in that in that module when we read Love That Dog. I mean, my students were crying, like literally crying when things happened in that text, and they were so into it. And every day them being like, I cannot wait to see what happens next.
Yeah.
So just starting off with, yes, I'm seeing them make connections like with literal and figurative language. I'm hearing them talk about the text outside of class. And then I'm every day them coming in and not being able to wait to see what happens next in the text. That's when I was like, I feel like my students are successful. Not because at that point, I still wasn't sure about like the academic growth and what their writing was going to look like. But at that point, I was like, okay, they're invested. They're in it. And their mindset is that they want to come to school every day and they want to learn. So I was like, if I have them, if I've hooked them, then academically, I know that they're going to be able to make gains because their mindset is right.
Yeah.
So that's when I was like, okay, this is going to be able to work.
Katie, would you say that was even your struggling readers had that same reaction?
Yeah, and that's what's really cool. Just a side note. Every module I had like celebration at the end of the module where kids would like showcase their work from each module and parents and would come in. And one of the things after module 1 that my principal said to me that was really eye-opening was he said, Katie, I went around and I went to some of your students that I knew were your struggling readers just because I want to make sure that they got the attention and recognition that they deserve. And he said, I can't believe he said, if I weren't the principal, I wouldn't have known who was your struggling reader and who wasn't, because they were all talking about and just as passionate as the other kids about the knowledge that they gained in this module. So I would say, yes, all of my students were really excited about the text and the topics, and were all participating in these discussions where oftentimes in the hallway, I'd be like, you need to be quiet. And I would come up to them and they were talking about Love That Dog. So I would say, yes, that's for all of my students.
Yeah. I think that you both highlighted some really important things. I mean, just as you both were speaking, I was jotting down notes, and I think one of the things that you both noted is that you took this learner mindset and were willing to grab all of the information that you could in order to execute this with equity for your students. But I also jotted down that you had this self-awareness, right? So you knew to check yourself, you knew to look at your students and to see, like, observe them and to see what they were learning. And I think that really helped you both to build buy-in. And tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just making inferences from what you were saying as you were speaking. And I think that you both very clearly have this inherent belief that students can do, right? Like, students can do what we put in front of them. So I just thought that was so powerful. And I just want to make a quick connection to the TNTP findings from the opportunity myth. Those 4 key points, because I think that you both really exemplify those, right? That you believe students learn best when they experience these 4 things. So grade appropriate assignments, deep engagement, high expectations, and strong instruction requiring students to do the work. So requiring them to do the thinking, for them to do the work. And, I think what you're highlighting is the outcome of that is where you're both standing today. So, I mean, just thank you. And Kyair, I loved hearing you talk as you were sharing that about the unpacking of Module 0. I was like, he is such an old soul. I love that.
Yeah.
So that was great. And Katie, thank you for your aha moments in, like, drawing yourself to the students. So I was making notes about how we could just, recap this for folks who are listening, who are heading into their first year, and teachers who are heading into their first year and they're thinking, I'm not sure. And I thank you for your deep honesty on this topic, because I think it's so important. Like Melissa said, we have to talk about this in order to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Katie, I was wondering, you mentioned, and this goes for Kyair as well, but Katie mentioned about you weren't sure if you would end up seeing any results in writing specifically, you brought up. I'm just wondering if you guys did see over the course of the year, did you see improvement in your students' writing?
Yeah, so that was definitely one of my areas that, as a teacher, honestly, writing has always been the thing that I struggled the most with teaching. And I just struggled, especially, and I'll tell this story. I tell this story over and over again about one of my students who really, what she said really exemplifies the writing instruction in Wit and Wisdom. But I had a student at the beginning of the year in a circle when we were talking about our strengths and our growth areas who said, all right, I'm a better reader. I got better at reading in third grade, but please, just don't make me write a lot. Like, I don't want to write. I'm not a writer. She just looked at me and said, I'm not a writer. And I was like, and in my head again, I was just like, I really don't know if this curriculum is going to teach her, if she's going to feel the success. And I really so badly wanted her to identify as a writer. And then again, fast forward to, I think it was like module 2, she was doing a focusing question task. And I saw her with her book in one hand and a pencil in the other. And she was just started on her own. She just started writing. And I went up to her and checked in and I said, looks like you're off to a good start. And she just looked at me and shrugged literally and said, turns out writing isn't that hard. You just have to know what you're writing about. And so I think more than anything,
that's an incredible, like, aha for a fourth grader.
Right. Yeah. And it said to me, okay, she has the same knowledge as everyone else in this class. And if not, even in module 1, like, she may have not been doing a deep analysis, right? I don't know her level of analyzing the text or synthesizing information, but she at that point was at least able to summarize the knowledge that she had gained in that module. And she had felt like she felt like an expert on the topic, and she was an expert on the topic. And I think that's where I saw the most growth in the writing. And again, I'll speak a lot to the mindset, but her confidence was that much greater by the end of module 1, that she then was identifying as a writer and not worrying about, can I write? She wasn't, her styles and conventions, maybe they weren't the best yet either. Her spelling probably wasn't the best, but she didn't have any hesitancy in putting that pencil to the paper and just going. And that's where I saw the most growth, their ideas getting out on paper and their ability to express knowledge through writing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie. That is amazing. And I think, a huge testament to that idea of building knowledge in a curriculum. Sometimes can feel like just a disconnected term, like, oh, it builds knowledge. But when you think about it just like that, right, that even your fourth grader realized
and I think
to write about.
I think too, and Kyair will talk a lot about this, is just giving it time. So in the beginning, I was like, I don't know. And I kept thinking, I don't know if this is going to work. But just being patient, I kind of am like, right away, I want results. That's my personality. But just giving them that time, and you really do see over time their growth. And it's not going to happen right away. And that's what I try to tell teachers a lot. You're not going to see it immediately, but over time, you're going to see their confidence grow, and you will see that academically as well in the end.
Right. Yeah, you might see sparks at the beginning, right?
Right.
Kyair did in module 0.
Yeah.
But yeah, it takes time for the real results to happen.
Yeah.
How about you, Kyair? Did you?
Yeah, well, so writing is definitely one of those areas where I really enjoy writing and enjoy teaching writing, but know that I feel like I'm a far better like reading teacher or a literacy teacher than I am writing. What I did appreciate, like Katie was saying about Wit and Wisdom, however, is that it's integrated, so it's not like stop, drop, and write, sort of thing. That it's integrated in and it's seamless. So what I found was that when we're able to know a lot about a topic, when we're able to speak on a topic, students are then able to write about the topic. So the idea that we spend a lot of time building the background knowledge and building content knowledge, because something stuck with me at a PD once, and it was not a good PD, and the facilitator kind of offended me because she was saying, well, some of these kids, in Baltimore, well, you just know that they're never going to do X, Y, or Z. And it was a really offensive comment because I was like, well, I just don't know how anyone would ever know that. I didn't know that you were sort of this omniscient character sent here to teach me your ways. And the reason why it rubbed me the wrong way is because there was this, our kids can't. And here's my thing. Even if some of our students may not, and I don't want to say that they won't, but even if they may not have this opportunity, the curriculum gives them the opportunity. So there's so much background building and knowledge building that you're able to confidently, like Katie said, write about the topic, right? So now we've leveled the playing field as far as experience. So when we're talking about resiliency in the Great Depression or the hero's journey and how that applies to different film or media, you might not have seen all the movies out there that kind of follow this cliche like hero's journey trope, but the curriculum will help you understand that journey. So I saw pretty clear results. I mean, one like my sort of like teacher anecdote is I've got a student, and she had an IEP, and her mother tells me, she said, and I'll just call her M, but she said, Mr. K, M has a mild case of cerebral palsy, and last year, I would have to do some of the writing for her, and she would just tell me her ideas, and I would literally just put on the paper whatever M told me to put. And we had our first focusing question task that was only honestly supposed to be a paragraph at best, maybe half a page for some of my kids. Nothing more than that is honestly the expectation. M wrote 3 pages front and back and wanted to take the assignment home overnight. She did all of the writing herself, and her mom just kind of came to me in tears, because she's like, I've never seen M want to write this much. I've never seen her feel this confident to do the writing herself. And stories like that to me prove that if there's a will, then there's a way, right? Like it just finds a way to get done. So I'm excited that, teachers like Katie and myself have been able to sort of harness this excitement and leverage it with honestly the idea that kids want to learn, they want to be great. And we know that if we can put those two together, plus the idea that we know and expect that you can be great from the teacher side of things, they're going to do pretty amazing things. You just got to give them the space, and a little bit of, belief goes a long way. And I've just really enjoyed hearing those stories and seeing those stories. So thank you, Katie, for highlighting that student, and just shout out to M, because that's kind of a lot of struggle that she's had to go through in her life to get to this point as a pretty strong writer.
Yeah. Do you think that you would be able to highlight in just both of your opinions why this integrated approach works in the curriculum? I mean, I know there's so much research on it, but just from your perspective in being involved in it, teaching it every day, maybe just also share a recap of what an integrated approach is, and also just share like why it works for you as teachers in 4th grade and 6th grade implementing this curriculum.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can start with that. And just, I really think that, first of all, the integrated approach is where everything is connected, right? The reading is connected to the writing. Anything that is grammar related is connected to the topic that they're learning about. The vocabulary word comes right from the text. Everything centers around that text, right?
Yep.
So in the past, in an isolated approach, students were doing like isolated grammar worksheets, or they were doing a writing prompt that didn't have to do with the text at all. So that would speak to my students saying, I never knew what to write about. Mm-hmm. They were doing a prompt that was isolated without that background knowledge.
Yep. And Katie, not to interject, but in previous podcasts, Melissa and I have talked about how we are very embarrassed that as teachers back in the day, what, Melissa, like 15 years ago, we had students doing like adverb worksheets, right? Isolation. And they knew like all I have to do is find the word and then add these letters and be done with it. And it was not helpful or connected.
Yeah. And I think, well, on that real quick, one thing that I do tell people though all the time is just the importance of sharing this research, because I think when teachers do that and still use the isolated approach, teachers are not doing that out of ill intent. Teachers are doing that because that is what they think is the best practice. And we have all implemented practices in the past that we thought were the best for our students.
Yeah.
So just the importance of sharing the most current research and talking about it and highlighting where it works and why it works.
Yeah. But we'll share it in the notes for this podcast as well.
Okay. So just to me, I feel like my students buy into the integrated approach because they see the purpose. It's not like they don't come in like, it's not like, what are we doing today? Or they see the purpose in what they're doing. And I think that motivates them. If I go to a PD and I know what we're doing and why we're doing it and what we're going to get out of it, I'm more invested. So when students come to class and they know that they're going to be reading certain chapters and responding to those chapters and having a discussion or a debate. Everything is centered around the same thing. And I just feel like understanding the purpose gives them more motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And then they're then able to make those connections too with each other, with the text, to the world. They're making a lot of connections, and I think enhances their motivation.
Yeah. And they're making connections that are grounded in text evidence, which makes them really strong connections versus, back in the day when I taught second grade and they'd be like, I'd like to make a personal connection. And then they went on a tangential story that I wasn't sure what we were talking about.
Correct. Yes.
And you're trying to figure out how to pull the rope back in to get them back in the conversation without hurting anybody's feelings.
That's right.
I also, just one more thing. I just really think they're more invested because they feel like they are the ones with the knowledge. It's not like I'm standing there and they're sitting there with a notebook and I'm giving them all the information. Mm-hmm. They're more invested because they're more of the leaders in the classroom. Yeah. They're taking on the ownership, which makes them feel like it's not as boring because they're doing it on their own. They're really the ones doing the heavy lifting.
Yes. And they have the power,
right.
you've given them the information, gotten out of their way, and transferred the power to them to have that productive struggle to learn.
Yes.
Awesome. Here, anything you want to add about the integrated approach or?
Well, I mean, so it's certainly nice, where I at least remember when I was in school, right, where you had your reading teacher, you had a language arts teacher, and it was, separate, right? That it was almost like these skills exist in isolation. There was sort of no way to bring them together. And what I really appreciated as a teacher is, in general, I just happen to like things that make sense. I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's pretty linear. It's logical. It makes sense to me. So, if there's some really difficult words, or as Katie was saying, right, for the circulatory system, there's a lot of, what we'd call, right, tier 3 academic vocabulary that sort of decontextualized can be really tough for students. But then you realize if I can put this word in context, we can practice myriad skills now. Context clues, inferencing. You can even go back to, word roots, but you're building it all in the context of the story, which they already feel confident with because so much knowledge has been built. Further, again, you've got equity being built in the classroom, because I feel like maybe depending on the demographics of the school, maybe somebody's parent is a doctor. So they've got more exposure to maybe some of these words or that type of book. But when everyone is getting sort of the same text and a lot of the same learning as far as the skills that are being taught, students just feel really comfortable that there's no expectation that I needed to come to you with something, because I feel that it's also lost that, as teachers, we can complain, or we've heard complaints where it's like, I need this. Well, look, we signed up for a job willingly, or at least I did. And it's our job, regardless of resources, to teach students where they're at. And this curriculum provides a lot of the resources and the stuff for us. So my thing is, if we believe the research that knowledge building is important for students and that the research is true and that we believe it, then a lot of teachers are like, oh, that makes sense. I'm totally on board with Wit and Wisdom. The disconnect then is, but you then also need to be integrated in your belief that you as the teacher also need to, put your head down and sort of put on the elbow grease and do the hard work of immersing yourself in understanding the curriculum. When you do that, you are then, wait for it, knowledge building yourself. And you're going to feel way more confident, so I can't underscore Katie's point enough, though, about like what the research says. My thing about the teaching profession is, I think that we need to sort of carry ourselves like doctors and other sort of, professionals where the prestige is still there. I feel like some of the prestige is rubbed off on teaching a little bit, and it's not where it used to be, or maybe in my mind it should be. But doctors go to conferences and they're getting up-to-date medical information, right? I mean, if you are out of step by, a year, 5 years or whatever, you are old school. This is past knowledge and you're not going to be current to be a doctor anymore. And that same mindset has to be applied, like Katie said. When the newest research comes out, we have to make it a point to understand what the research says, but also why that new research is important. Like, I don't think anybody's going to fault a teacher, like you were saying, right, that this is how it was done 15 years ago. But now that we've got new current research that says knowledge building and equity is good in the classroom and these are the results, more teachers need to understand that research so that we can keep current with the practices. That's what other professionals do. We have to do the same thing.
Yes,
Absolutely.
There's a bit of a rant, and I'm sorry.
No.
But
And a good one. I actually just saw a meme. I was trying to find it while you were talking, but I can't find it. There's some kind of meme that said something very similar. You know, would we still go to a doctor or hospital that's doing the same thing they were 20 years ago? Then why are we doing that in the classroom?
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
That sounds like
I'm
a little
gonna find it
Seinfeld.
for you. I'm going to send it to you.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean-
what are we talking about?
yeah. I totally agree. I think that that's why we are doing this podcast.
Yeah.
You know, foundationally, that's one of the reasons we were like, we need to bring light to this research, but we also need to connect it to what's currently happening in this curriculum so that we can create that build that buy-in for teachers and leaders and coaches and everybody so that they can see like things have changed and why are we doing things the old way? Like, and I mean, the world has changed. So if we're really preparing students for college and career and the world beyond, you know, K-12 education, then we have to change our mindsets and shift there. And, you know, in a previous podcast, Melissa and I did talk about that. We were like, you know, in just this 15 years that we've been teaching or, you know, in education, things have shifted so much. So we can't imagine what it would be for a teacher who is 30 years into their career, has been doing things, quote unquote, this way for so long. And then, you know, this curriculum comes in and it's like, oh my gosh, this is just completely different. And it challenges my belief system. It challenges what I've been doing for 30 years, 3 decades. And now I'm being asked to do something completely different. That is a huge undertaking. And that really requires that learner mindset, that productive struggle we're trying to instill in our students. But, you know, it's really understanding the why, like you both highlighted. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. So much more to talk about there, but
I know.
We'll I'll go on rants for days.
We could.
So to switch gears just a little bit, I just wanted to think a little bit about, I know that we talked about all of the great things, not all, but a few of the great things that happened in your classrooms this year. But Katie mentioned right at the beginning too, that like this was the first year and it was a challenging year. So I was wondering if we could dig in a little bit there. I know you guys have been totally honest. So I being able to be honest too about what was challenging about this first year and maybe something you're looking forward to doing differently or just in it, having a second shot at it in your second year.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest challenges for me, and everyone will say this, was first of all, the pacing. Just looking at it and thinking, how am I going to get through all of this in one lesson every day? And in that, as you know, Baltimore City kind of adopted a little bit late, and our ability to get it off the ground and running was a little slower than I think what a lot of people wanted. So I don't think I necessarily had internalized. Wit and Wisdom talks a lot about the difference between planning and internalizing. And I think in the beginning, I was really just planning day to day. So I was looking at a lesson, I was like kind of writing down the key things I had to get to, and I was teaching it. And I wasn't looking forward to like the end of that focusing question arc or the end of module task. And I wasn't really seeing how everything connected. I was doing everything day by day. I didn't understand how everything was going to fit together in the end. I didn't get it. And I didn't understand how everything was related. In fact, I didn't fully understand this actually until my third module. So 4th grade is A Great Heart, then it's Extreme Settings, and then it's Revolutionary War. And in the third quarter, one of my students said to me, Ms. Scotty, you understand that the Revolutionary War module is just like a combination of Great Heart and Extreme Settings, because these students, the people had to survive in an extreme setting, and the Americans really had to have a great heart to overcome all these challenges.
Oh my
God. And I was like, oh, so that's why they picked those in this order, right? So I just think now that I see these connections and what it all builds to and how all the knowledge and all the content is connected together, that's really going to help in my planning. So now instead of like doing that day-to-day planning, I really am going to be able to be more intentional about what I'm doing every day for my students, because now I'm not at the like micro level. I'm more at the like overall looking at the whole year and able to purposely plan. And I also just think that having a year under, one thing I will say about my leader that I really appreciate, and I hope that more leaders in Baltimore do this, is that he said at the end of the year, there is no way that I should change a teacher's grade level after only year one of Wit and Wisdom. And I think that was really important that he acknowledged that, because he saw the level of preparation and planning that had to go in each lesson. So just knowing that I'm doing the same modules next year and I'm going to be able to like amp it up and make it even more engaging and exciting for my kids is exciting for me. I'm going in knowing what is happening and the purpose behind it all. And I think that will just enhance my instruction even more.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there is so much to learn and it's so deep that getting to do it again will be an experience that you'll be able to dive deeper and just really be able, like you said, pull out at that macro level.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Kyair, how about you?
Yeah. I mean, really, I just kind of equate like the first year with, Wit and Wisdom to, my first year teaching. That, my first year, there were some, bright spots, but there were also some dimmer spots, if you will. And there was just so much to learn that I remember going in and I thought, I just want to focus on like three things, right? Like I got to make sure that classroom management is a thing. Otherwise, if there's no management, then there's no learning. So I wanted to also then make sure with Wit and Wisdom, like you really need to understand what's going on in a particular module. Because if you don't understand what they're supposed to get out of a module or a lesson, then there's really honestly won't be any learning. And in a way, you'll still be teaching in isolation because, as Katie said, you're planning and you haven't internalized the what, why, how, so that you are able to make connections, or students like Katie's can make that connection on their own. So a big challenge for me was really understanding and internalizing, right? And I think that what I'm excited about, much like my second year of teaching, was I felt sort of like a new person. It was almost like a new Terminator, so to speak, right? Like I came in and I was like, oh my gosh, what a good feeling. I'm faster, better, stronger, or whatever those words were, right? And yeah, I don't know. Just your second year teaching, I'm unsure if you guys recall or it had the same feeling, but I just felt so much smarter. You had 1 year under your belt. There were some things that you just knew, oh, okay, I can cut this, spit out the bone on that. Like, this is awesome. I just felt invincible that second year. Now, I still struggled, but I just felt better than my first year. All that to say that I'm excited to take all of my learning this year, my annotations, my highs, my lows, student feedback that I have, like my notes and reflections and lesson plans and PowerPoints, and be like, okay, this is how we're really going to sort of like ramp it up and just make it better, and I think that's the big thing, right? Because the research also says that when you make wholesale changes to a curriculum, it ultimately ends up taking 3 to 5 years for the dust to settle and the results to really be seen, right? That the first year, scores might be stagnant or even regress or, dip, all that. And then you slowly start to see an uptick. The issue or the caveat that I make is that it can't be teacher leaders, coaches, teachers, the district. It can't be pockets of people. So the importance is understanding that we have to all get to a point where, as I've said before, this is it. Like we have no other choice but to succeed. So I want to acknowledge that all teachers want their kids to do well. Like I really believe all teachers in Baltimore City want their kids to do well. So if we take that as a truth, then that means that we have to do the work to get to that truth. And Wit and Wisdom is our truth for the foreseeable future, which means we need to internalize and we need to do the work to understand what the curriculum is asking of us and what it's demanding of students. And we can just get that so we can get to this truth that I just mentioned. We're honestly going to be in a really good spot as a district, but it can't be pockets of schools or teachers or teacher leaders. And it's got to be everybody.
Yeah.
Yes. Agree.
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
part of
that was really powerful.
Yeah, I think that's part of what we're doing, you know, with this podcast and sharing as much as we can on Twitter and meeting up with as many people as possible. Is the more we share that and the more we share these success stories. And really, I think at the beginning of when I started doing this fellowship, I said, step one is mindset. And if teachers don't have the mindset, if the students don't have the mindset, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important.
Yeah. And I'll add leaders to that as well.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
for sure. So I do want to ask Kyair, do you mind sharing, because you had the honor of doing like a little co-presentation with David Lieben
Mm-hmm.
and at our most recent Teacher Institute. And I feel like that relates to what we're talking about. Would you mind just giving a quick recap about what you spoke about on stage with David? And we will tag him in this podcast so that we can hopefully get it shared on his page. David, if you're listening, please share this.
Yeah. Well, so David talked quite a bit, and I'm really happy that he did, just about the other different curricula that are out there, sort of like the past and present of curricula, right? What are the demands? What does the research say? How schools have been implementing it in terms of success stories. And what I appreciate is, he was talking about, look, he's been around for a while. He's helped, create curricula. He's been around, for the Common Core implementation and sort of some of the standards and that development and vertical alignment or progression. So through all of this expertise, it's understanding that, Wit and Wisdom is the best program that's out there in terms of vertical alignment, integration of skills, deepening of content and concepts, in addition to being, text-based and also Common Core standards aligned. So when districts are looking at, does it check this box? It does. It does. And I appreciate that they've recognized that ECE, right, our folks in early childhood education, need a little extra help. So they've come out with geodes for K-2, so that there are decodable readers that go along with the content of what they're reading, but also are able to build in the vocabulary. So if leaders are able to structure instructional time, you can still do, tenets, if you will, of guided reading. So that's a little bit of a digression, but I appreciate that David talked a lot about sort of the history of curriculum and education and the importance of Wit and Wisdom not failing in Baltimore, because there are kind of, honestly, other districts that are just waiting, honestly, to see if a pretty Black district can succeed with it. If a district with some students who are below or far below grade level can do well. And that's why I think that it's important for us, to give ourselves some grace and to understand that this is a long runway and that we're not exactly expecting, the plane to take off and be at cruising altitude after a year, that we do need a long runway to get to our destination. Not a bad metaphor. I'll take it. Yeah. And then as far as like things that I talked about, it's what I said at the top of the podcast. Like, I was just very real about who I thought Wit and Wisdom was for. Like, I thought it belonged in sort of Howard or Montgomery County and not necessarily in Baltimore City. But I think that what was important for me to get across to teachers was this: you're allowed to be in your feelings and you're allowed to have negative thoughts, but not at the expense of student success. Because again, I think that you really want your kids to do well. That's probably why you're this passionate and maybe even angry. But I want you to check those feelings and be mentally and physically present today, as I was saying in the keynote, to understand that Wit and Wisdom is our present and it is our future. So we need to commit to committing and also make sure that we can do well ourselves with immersing ourselves in understanding, asking questions. And step one was showing up at the Institute to get all of this great knowledge so that you feel better prepared come August, right? You've got the opportunity. Do it. Someone's helping you with the exposure. Expose yourself and learn more about the curriculum. And finally, just leaving off on a high note that I wanted to, that I talked about was all teachers are also capable of greatness, right? It just takes a little bit of a push And then all of a sudden, our potential turns into something magically beautiful and kinetic, and we are doing the work. But that initial push is the buy-in, it's the mindset, it's the being present for the PD.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so amazing. I just, some things that I've heard along this year, especially right at the beginning of adopting this curriculum, I heard people say things like, well, this belongs in a suburban school district. And I heard people say, well, there's no research behind this, right? Because it's new. So no one's proven that it's done yet. And personally, I don't know if you guys agree, but I'm just really proud of our district that we didn't sit back and say it's not for our kids and say, well, we'll wait and let someone else be the people that try it first. And we stepped up and said, no, this is based on research. There are really great things in here that our kids deserve, and we need to just jump in. And so I'm really thankful that that was the message that you guys sent that day.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. I just commend both of you so much for jumping in with 2 feet, having that learner mindset, and, just respecting and believing in your kids enough that this is what they deserve and this is what all kids deserve, and you're going to give it to them. So you are both amazing, and we're so lucky to have talked with you today.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you.
Can we ask you one last question before you guys go?
Of course.
Just wondering if you could give our teachers, either first-year teachers that are starting Wit and Wisdom or maybe jumping into their second year, if you could give just one piece of advice, what would that be?
My piece of advice would be to fall in love with reading with your students. So I think we get caught up in the day-to-day, the planning, what I have to do next, how am I going to get this all in one day, all the questions, all the insecurities. But just let the process happen and watch your kids fall in love with the text and do that with them and be excited with them and be in the moment. I have a really hard time being in the moment. I'm a planner, as you all know, and I really just want everything I'm always thinking about the next step. And this year, I had to really learn I watched my kids fall in love with reading, and I tried to be more present with them. And when they were in love with the text, that's when, as I spoke before, that's when everything kind of clicked for me. And then everything in Wit and Wisdom is so based on the text that if you allow your students to be that engaged in the text and be that excited, all the pieces will fall into place from there. So that would be my advice. Read the text. Read the text before the students read it. Get excited about the text, and then watch them fall in love with them and be as passionate as they are. And that passion will be contagious for the students, for other teachers at your school, and for other people in the district as well.
That's great advice, Katie. Kyair, how about you?
I'll preface just by saying that, I believe that as professionals, right, that there are professional expectations for our job, right, that we need to do our lesson plans, sort of be on top of, our daily responsibilities as a teacher. So my advice has nothing to do with, getting into the weeds of Wit and Wisdom, because to me, that's the expectation. It's part of the job. So I will just succinctly say my advice is this: believe that your kids will ultimately show you what they can do. If you believe that they can, they will do. And ultimately, they will surprise you, amaze you, and humble you because you decided to make a conscious choice to believe that they can, because they really truly can, right? The Wit and Wisdom motto, or Great Minds motto, right, is that every child is capable of greatness. If you can buy into that, which is kind of, I'm sure, why a lot of us do the work, or what we hope that our kids can do, you're going to be just fine with the program itself. Like, if you're not afraid to sort of take on the work that's the expectation, that's well within your job responsibilities, just believe that your kids can. They'll show you what they can do.
I love
you guys have given me goosebumps like 5 times today.
I think it's yes, and amazing. But that speaks to that belief that, the teachers are holding high expectations. And I like to think of it in a different way, in like a self-affirming way of like that confirmation bias. So if you are believing that your kids can do that, then everything that they're doing is adding to that bucket of like, you're adding a chip in the bucket. Like, yes, they can do this. Yes, they can do this. Rather than looking for what they can't do and focusing on that, you're doing exactly what we're doing here today, talking to you, is we're bringing to the surface the successes and building on those. So it's just this cycle of highlighting the success and the cycle of that confirmation bias that they can do. So that is incredible. I also wanted to ask you both if you could just quickly share where we can find you, because I know people are going to be listening to this podcast and they're going to be like, we need to follow them on Twitter. We need to find them on social media. So could you share where we can find you after this podcast so we can all stalk you after this?
Well, currently you can find me. I don't want you to find me. Okay. So, I'm at the lake. No, I'm just kidding. So do you want our Twitter? Is that?
Yes.
So
did you say Twitter handle? Well, I'm not sure how to say that.
Yes. My Twitter handle is K Story, like a book. That was my maiden name. So K Story, STORY, Scotty, SCOTTI.
Awesome. Thank you. And we will link that also in our bio. Kyair, where can we find you?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter at Kyair B, Kyair, and then the letter B, sort of all together, Kyair B on Twitter. And then on Instagram, I do post some photos from school. More recently, my dog, or some events that I do with students. And the Instagram handle or name is Mr. K _BCPSS.
Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, it was such a pleasure to talk to you guys today. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. All right. Have an amazing day, and we will talk to you soon. Don't think that you're off the hook. We're gonna have you back again.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
I look forward to it.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye.
Bye.